Another episode of MC Fireside Chats. My name is Brian Searl with Insider Perks and Modern Campground. Finally getting my studio to come together behind me here, so kind of excited. Still a few more pieces to go, and maybe this mic will be coming at me from a side instead of directly in front of my face. Although I probably look better with it in front of my face in hindsight. So I got that. Like, there's always a glass half full moment. So, but super excited to be here for our first this is our first episode of the new revamped kind of show format, even though we appear to be missing like a bunch of people who committed to come to the show. But hopefully they will show up. And if not, we'll have a good conversation here. So we have Scott Bahr from Cairn Consulting Group. And Mark Koep from Campground Views as two of our recurring guests here. And then we have, as a special guest this week, Angie Whitcomb is the president and CEO of Hospitality Minnesota. Welcome, Angel. Is it Angie or Angel?
Thank you.
Angie. Okay, my notes say Angel, so that's fun. Anyway, I thought that was weird. I was looking at it. I wanted to call you Angie. I'm like, it doesn't make. I mean, there are angels, so I just didn't want to be, judgmental or anything. Because Angel's a good name too. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly, Angie, and tell us just a little bit about your organization?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I'm Angie Whitcomb. I'm the president of Hospitality Minnesota, which is the statewide trade association for restaurants, hotels, resorts, and campgrounds in the state of Minnesota. And we have about 3,500 in membership. And I joined the organization just under 2 years ago.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you here. I want to dive into some of the things that you're doing because, as we all know, associations are critical to the success of a lot of these small businesses who don't have, well, big businesses too, right, to be clear, but a lot more, I think, to the small businesses who don't necessarily have the resources of some of the bigger groups. And so excited to dive into that with you. Before we kind of get started, Mark and Scott, it's been, well, like since last year, since we were on a show together, right? Yes. So, there's my little, what's happening to my camera? That's fun. So just drag one of them over there, Lisa. So anything else that's been going on in your guys' world that you feel we need to bring up and discuss?
Yeah, so we've been on our end. So first off, hello everybody. Brian, I love that introduction that you have for this video. That was cool. I love it. The biggest thing that's going on in our world is that we're going into the winter and spring trade show season. And so our team's been doing a number of trade shows. We'll be at Carolina this next week, and kind of hearing the same thing across the board. And I think Scott's going to echo this too, as we're kind of into a normal camping year. The election cycle's over, right? Yay, we don't have the uncertainty of that. And this will be the first year really post-COVID that we kind of have a normal camping year. And so a lot of people are experiencing that for the first time. A lot of park owners who bought properties during the peak of this bubble and or this COVID bubble that we had. And they're kind of discovering that, wait, you mean people don't just randomly show up at my park all the time and fill it up all the time? I actually have to do marketing, and what do I have to do there? And so we're kind of seeing that right now where it's more of a normal season.
Do people show up? I think the people that show up are just there to like dine and ditch, so to speak. Those are the people, like those people still show up, but I feel like that's not helping the bottom line of some of ours. Yeah. And we're going to get into that, right? Like I think it's a normal year, but I also think it's an abnormal year from an economic standpoint, right? Like and we'll talk about more about that maybe on our Outwired show later, Scott, because we don't want to get into some of that stuff. But like it is normalizing from what you just talked about, from COVID, from the presidential election, things like that. I think it'll be interesting to see what the economic conditions of 2025 and some of the policies that are being put into place, state and federally, that may or may not impact this, inflation, stuff like that. But that's like a Debbie Downer conversation. We'll save that for Outwired. So, Scott, anything on your plate?
We're looking at this year's data for the new outdoor hospitality report that'll be coming out later this spring. We've been immersed in that. And I would echo what Mark said, that there's going to be some interesting stuff for people to see, to be a little bit of a teaser. It feels like things are, in some respects, they're resetting, but it's resetting based on the example I use is, think of a natural disaster like a flash flood or a forest fire that comes through and kind of scours things out. And then what happens on the other side is very different. And that was kind of what COVID did. So you're going to see new things sprout up. You're going to see some changes in the landscape, and you're going to see some of the things that were there before appear as well. So that's my metaphor for the day. I'll try not to use any more because I'm not very good at it. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting year, and there's a lot going on this spring, and we'll have to keep apprised of it. I know, Mark, I see your name all over the place at the different conferences. I'll be at a couple myself in the coming months, so it'll be fun.
Yeah, that should be the Carvic conference is coming up soon, right? Are they still called Carvic? I don't even know.
This Sunday. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I wish I could get to all these. It's expensive to fly from Canada. But anyway, we'll try to do that. But Scott, do you want to talk about briefly, like I want to get into Angie and her association. Obviously, I don't think we're going to be able to talk a full hour about that as much as fascinating. Well, we could. Angie's probably doing enough interesting things we could talk for an hour.
I think Scott, so. I'd love to talk to her for about an hour. So yeah.
Well, we will. We'll talk to her. But maybe we'll give her a half hour. Is that fair? Is that enough for you, Scott?
Well, I have to leave early. So.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll just briefly then, and we're going to dive into this more in Outwired later, but briefly touch on the report that we just released for hospitality highlights.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you and I have talked about extensively, but comes out in this evaluation, I'll call it, that we do of the marketplace and what's going on, based a lot on people's behavior and interests and how that's changing. And a lot of the traditional ways that people are seeking to experience the outdoors are changing in terms of they're waning a bit. It's a bit of a refresh. So what we're seeing is this desire for different types of experiences while people are camping and glamping and again, experiencing the outdoors. Whether it's how they're looking for information, which I think is very important. And it's one of the things that we do a lot of is looking at what is the level of interest in these different topics. So for example, we've seen this huge increase in people who were using the new way of referring to car camping, which is people who sleep and stay in their cars. That part of the industry is taking off, and it's taking off not just from participation, but the products as well, which I think are very important. Because, for example, a lot of campgrounds won't accept people sleeping in their cars.
Yeah, because there's the stereotypical adage of like a trailer park, right? That's not. Right. It's not what it was.
But
or
so
what
now
the media made it out to be.
Yep. Campgrounds either figuring out a way to compromise with these folks, or these folks improvising, but the industry itself is responding a little bit with more of the products, the tents that can attach to vehicles, and the rooftop tents, which have been around for a little while anyway, but also the ones that go out the back. If you have, say, a Subaru Outback is a very common car camping vehicle, so they attach it to the back. So now they actually have a tent. People are building the products to go inside of these. And the reason I bring it up is it's a growth segment. When everything now, so much else, we've heard a lot about declines and in different sectors, and especially with RVs, we've seen some declines there. But this is growth. This is growing. The interest, not just in the way people are doing it in their cars, but the products that support it. And I think that's just important to consider in the bigger context of our industry, which is, one, how are people looking for information, but how are they looking to experience things? Again, we've looked at some of these other trends, like, people's interest in the actual words of like camping and RVing are declining. But when you look at, the van life or car camping again, or, some of these other forest bathing is up, continues to climb. People ask about forest.
What do you actually like? I mean, I understand. Is it literally what it is, forest bathing, or?
It's basically sitting in the forest and kind of taking it all in. Kind of like what you used to do. You walk out in the woods and maybe sit on a rock or something and just kind of sit there and hang out for a bit. That's kind of what it is.
Okay. Well, like when you say it, it comes to mind. Like I've been to like those natural hot springs, right? We have some here in Canada, and like I've been to Iceland, and Like there's kind of those natural hot springs. You kind of like that's what I would think forest bathing would be, right?
It is right, but no, it is not. It's like kind of like immersing yourself in the forest as you would in a hot spring. It sounds much more inviting, by the way. But yeah, it's not that, Brian. It's that. It's just kind of people hanging out and relaxing and looking at different ways of kind of experiencing the outdoors. And there's these desires to reconnect as well. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot to say about it. But in terms of kind of what we were trying to do with the report is show how how people want to experience the outdoors is changing, how the words they're using are changing, and there still is opportunity out there, but you have to go get it, and you have to kind of meet people where they are and bring them in, because they're not using a lot of the traditional ways, whether it's the channels, the words they're using, how they're doing their searches, but also how they want to stay. It's like I could produce like 50 graphs that show this.
We're going to talk about it more on Outwired, right? Like this is part of what we're going to dive into. Is Lisa puts me on camera with my water bottle open. It's a nice water bottle. We should have a sponsor for the water bottle sponsor, but I'm not that popular. Nobody watches the show. So it is like, I do want to dive into that more on Outwired, right? Because I have a lot of thoughts about, some of the things that are changing, like you talked about with behavior, but also stereotypes like car camping or trailer parks or things like that, like traditionally a lot of owners have said like, ew, I don't want that at my park. And I think that there's obviously justification for some of that ooh, right? Or ooh, ew, I can't even, how do you pronounce that word? Anyway, but I also think that a lot of it is changing, right? And so that terminology, we almost need like an updated guidebook of sorts to say like, this could mean this, so watch out for it still and be cautious of it and maybe don't accept it into your park. But also there's a segment of this now that is growing or shrinking in some cases or changing that maybe you do want in your park, especially if we're heading into an economic time where it's no longer you build it, they will just come, right?
Right. Yeah. I think the bottom line is and if you look at the report, what you'll be able to see is that there are some relationships to external factors like the travel price index, gas prices, stuff like that, and how people are seeking to travel. I'm going to say travel in general. And because one of the things that I talk about a lot is that people have a desire to travel. They still want to travel somehow. The outdoors is typically a great way to do that. But if you have sustained economic anxiety, that's going to change even more. People are going to look for other types of alternatives apart from some of the traditional ways of experiencing the outdoors and how they travel. In recent years, we saw road trips. Again, road trips and car camping, they're highly related. It's less expensive in terms of prices of gas and so on. You can look for alternatives. There's a lot of free places to stay. And again, these are driving a lot of the behavior. So it's one of those things that the people who are at the park should keep track of. They should monitor what people are doing. They should talk to their guests, ask them questions. Those people who are car camping, I think they're great people to have a conversation with because they'll tell you a lot about what's going on and look at their motivations and what's driving them. But we know
what's driving them. They're sleeping in it, Scott. That's easy.
Asleep at the wheel has a whole new meaning.
We don't even need data scientists like you anymore. We've got this handled.
So anyway, it's with all the economy, the election, as Mark mentioned, that kind of being in the rearview mirror. I'm going to keep using metaphors until someone shuts me down. It's keep an eye on these things because they're impacting what people are doing. And like I said, there's growth out there. It's not you're gonna have to find it, and it's not in places that are traditional.
Well, and that's why I think it's interesting that we have Angie on here, right? And when I want to dive into Angie's association here for a few minutes, because it's interesting. Like well, all of us, Mark and Scott, we've been in this industry for a long time, and I've been to, pre-COVID, I went to every single state association show. I would still like to go to every state association show. People email me too much for me to do that, and some I moved to Canada or something. So that's it anyway. But like, for all the associations, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but like for every other association except for Minnesota that exists, and some states don't have any, but for the ones that exist, there are none that combine campgrounds and hotels, let alone campgrounds, hotels, restaurants, all of hospitality, are there?
There are none, no. The closest you'll get would be like a DMO or destination marketing organization who may represent some campgrounds that are in their area. But that's about the closest you'll get. Usually and there's reasons, and I'll let Angie kind of explain. Like, I imagine there's challenges because campgrounds are obviously different than hotels, and hotels may be driving more revenue to the association, and therefore they have a better say or a bigger say or whatnot. I can't imagine trying to herd that many cats. Not only are you doing hotels and campgrounds, but also I think you said restaurants also. So
well, you're going to imagine, and Angie's going to tell us how she does.
Yeah.
She's going to give us our secret sauce in a second. But like, but yeah, like I think that's just, it's something that we emphasize on this show so much, is the working together piece of it. And we've had, for example, Harvest Hosts on here and Hip Camp, Alyssa, and I've talked at conferences to people who like, it goes back to the stereotypes, right? These people are staying in a Walmart parking lot, or, these people are staying overnight at a winery and that's taking away business from my private campground, or, they're staying in a hotel, that's not my guest. But the truth is, I think, and the way our like data that Scott has researched, and I'm sure Angie will tell us, is like, people sometimes want to stay in a hotel, and maybe next time they want to go camping, and maybe the second time they will go camping, they'll stay in a Walmart parking lot or a winery, and then the next time they'll go to a private campground. And so like, I think there's a ton of crossover here for all this stuff to work together and be cohesive, which is ultimately what we want. They all complement each other. But instead, the conversation that I hear tends to be like, why would you go to a hotel when you could stay outside and wave to your neighbor? I don't want to wave to my neighbor. That's me. Like, right? Like, I don't care. Like, but I'm also like a workaholic, right? So that's not probably the way I should be. But then there's the people in the hotels who are like, why would you want to go outside with bugs? And so like, I feel like there's just a place for all this stuff. As we talked about, more people are going back into cruising, for example, this year after COVID. Toby O'Rourke has talked about that in some of her LinkedIn posts and stuff. But that's just, they're not gone from camping. They're just doing something different this year. So Angie, how do you herd all the cattle?
With that, yeah, well, you don't herd all the cattle. And so to give a little background on how we ended up being the association that is trying to cover it all. Prior to COVID, we were 3 separate associations with a parent organization. So we were the Restaurant Association, we were the Lodging Association, and then we were the Resort and Campground Association. Pre-COVID, they merged them all together, brought the parent company in, and thought that we would get much further with combining efficiencies rather than having 6 boards and 6 foundations and all of the things. And it makes perfect sense. And then COVID hit, and we never got to launch as this big, powerful voice of hospitality in Minnesota because we were too busy just trying to get information to everybody during the pandemic on here's the rules as they're ever changing. Yeah. And here's, the tools and avenues for survival. So, it is a unique challenge that we are members well. And one of the things that I have found, and my background was in Chamber of Commerce world, so I was used to sort of representing of the business community in a larger scale. So having 3 diverse segments of membership to serve is not unique to me from an experience standpoint, but it does bring up the challenges. And for as many similarities as all of our segments or sectors have, there are those unique things. And, Minnesota, we've struggled the last couple of years with weather. I mean, we had a winter with no snow or ice. And so winter camping and all outdoor winter activities took a hit. And then we had the spring that was all floods and all rain. And so we've just taken a hit that way, and that impacts our resorts and campgrounds. How do you herd the cats? I don't know that you do. You just, I think, Mark, you said it beautifully, where as much as you're trying to find people where they're and meet them where they're at and bring them in from the guest perspective. That's really what we are doing. We're trying to do with our membership. And the advocacy things, the advocacy issues that we tackle on behalf of the greater hospitality industry, there's a lot of commonality. I mean, you talk about employer mandates, so earn sick and save time, and minimum wage mandates. And particularly in our restaurants and hotels right now, we've got a battle going on here with service fees and the ability for states and these businesses to charge them. So there's always something. And, campgrounds this year, they showed up on the advocacy radar with their own special unique legislative challenge. And that's that language between the campground and the guest and making sure that it is changed to not be the landlord-tenant relationship or perceived that way, and uninvite a guest if need be, without it being a civil issue. So we've got, we're busy all the time, and we're looking for commonalities for efficiencies, but we also, as the statewide association with that many stakeholders, we've got to find those unique issues and address them equally. And we do get a lot of heat. Oh, restaurants get all the attention, our hotels get all the attention, but we're trying to service all of them.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, right? Like whether we were just basically making this up because we have no concept of what happens, like in our own little heads, telling us the story of everybody's infighting and give me preference or not preference, or you're preferring hotels over campgrounds over restaurants. Like, and the more I think about it, like there probably obviously is a little bit of that going on because, not everybody is always getting along and happy-go-lucky with everybody else, but I think it's probably very small. Because the other dynamic here too is like you think about the dynamic we're coming from campgrounds and hotels. Like, how does the hotel with the restaurant feel about Bob Evans being promoted or something, right? Like just making something up. I want them to eat breakfast with me. Why are you promoting their restaurant? So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing that's one of the things that I've enjoyed moving into the association world versus the chamber. We're not necessarily promoting specific businesses as much as we're advocating for and fighting for an industry. And we are all part of the hospitality industry. So our goal at Hospitality Minnesota is to ensure that there are policies that support our industry and allow our industry to thrive, whether you are an independent campground on the most northern part of Minnesota by Lake of the Woods, or you're a hotel chain that's got locations in all of our major metropolitan areas in the state. So advocating for an industry helps eliminate that kind of infighting, or they're getting more attention than we are. I will say when municipal issues pop up, so we just had a policy issue we were fighting, or a policy proposal we were advocating against in the city of Minneapolis. And it was about a 2-year discussion, and it took a lot of our energy internally from our government affairs team and our board, and everybody was really engaged with it. And we got a little bit of heat from outstate, like, why are you so metro focused? You're a statewide association. And that's a fair question. And the answer in that case is because if this policy is allowed to pass here, it's coming to you, and it's coming to outstate Minnesota. So it's kind of like which, I don't want to say fire because that's a little too close to home right now with what's going on. But, it's like which tire is lowest on your car, right? Yep. We're going car camping. Which tire is lowest? That's the one you're going to fill up. So it's which issue is the most pressing right now that we need to stop. And it's we joke internally that it's like, legislative whack-a-mole. Which one are we going to hit right now? And which one's going to provide the greatest benefit for all?
So talk us through some of the, I'm interested in the economic shifts and some of the demographic changes that we've gone through over the last few years, right? And I think this maybe applies to hotels a little bit, but obviously we're a campground related show. So anything you pull out specific to that, right? But just like so much has changed, as Scott talked about, right? With just not just car camping, but just the types of people who would stay. And some of them are the same, of course, but the types of people who would stay pre-COVID to during COVID to now after COVID. And then also the economy changes, presidential elections, all the things. So what's the outlook of Minnesota look like from your association standpoint? I know that's a big question.
Like that is a loaded. That's a loaded question, and oh gosh, so from an economic standpoint, so if we look at the data, one of the things, and I wrote this down, Mark, is that you talked about is that their behaviors are changing, and consumers are weighing their options, and they're looking at the costs, and they're being very selective. And whether that's you're booking a trip and you're going to camp, or you're going to go, or you're going to glamp, or you're going to car camp, what's more economic, right? And how far are you willing to drive, and what's the cost of gas, and all that goes into that. I think consumer behavior is certainly driving it, but what we're seeing in the numbers is that a lot of our members are reporting up, but that doesn't equate to being more profitable year over year. Revenues are up, but they're not necessarily up in us or the labor costs or
now,
those things. So
is that because of inflation?
It's because of inflation. It's because in Minnesota we have really aggressive minimum wage inflators and minimum wage, and we all want to take care of our employees. But we're also unique in that, we're one of, 7 states without the tip credit, one of 7 or 4 states that doesn't allow tip pooling. We've got really aggressive minimum wage laws. And so and we've got a labor shortage in the hospitality industry. In our industry in the state, we employ about 350,000 jobs. And on any given day, we're about 15,000 employees short of where we need to be.
Why do you think that? And I know
that's
we're
a
lagged.
lot.
Sorry,
and so you're
which
paying
is why
more.
You're not talking over me. We're lagged. I'm sorry. I just wanted to preface it for the audience to think that I wasn't interrupting you weirdly, and you weren't trying to interrupt me, or maybe you were, because it's better when you interrupt me and you talk. But specifically related to that, like, I'm curious, why do you think that shortage exists with employees? Because we hear a lot about layoffs that are happening in different sectors, maybe mostly tech for now. But we hear of a lot of people, I think, who are looking for jobs, and obviously there's a mismatch. But why do you think those vacancies exist when there are more people looking for work now?
Yeah, I think in our industry, we saw a lot of people leave hospitality during the pandemic and seek other opportunities, other industries. I truly, Brian, that there is a huge awareness gap on what it means to have a job in the hospitality industry and how many great options there are to work in our industry. One of the things we are doing, I mean, this is a focus of our education foundation here at Hospitality Minnesota. And so we're working with some of our national partners on all 3 segments, camping and both restaurant and lodging too. So, and just working on workforce training programs. And we were successful last legislative session in securing funding to build a free online training program, customer service training program for anyone in the hospitality industry in the state. So if you're a campground owner and you want to offer free training to your employees or free training to candidates you're considering or promoting from within. I mean, we're doing everything that we can to try to create those opportunities, cost-effective opportunities for employers to retain employees. And then within the industry, really closing that awareness gap of what your opportunities there are. I mean, if you want to be an accountant, you can still do that in the hospitality industry. If you want to be in marketing, if you want to be a chef, if you want to run your own resort or campground, there's all of these opportunities. And we really are trying to drive home the fact that it's a very low barrier entry point to get into our industry if you have that entrepreneurial spirit and want to do that.
Go ahead, Scott. Like, we'll see you later on that word. Scott's got to jump. But yeah, Angie, I'm curious, like, we talk about some of the guest preferences and how those have changed. How do you see that changing? And like, what do you think people are looking for as they go camping in 2025 in Minnesota? Is it different? Is it the same? Is it?
Yes. I mean, I think it's both, right? In some of our campgrounds in amenities. I think when you're being more selective with how you spend your money, it's where can I get the most for what I'm willing to spend, and the most in terms of the overall experience and convenience, and some would call it comfort, but it's your preference. Like if you don't want to go glamping, but you prefer to tent camp or whatever. But so I do think that what we're seeing is just a more intent on what's the overall experience going to be, and how unique can we make it.
So that's a conversation,
and that's
we
forcing
have quite a bit
our members
in the campground. Sorry, I know we're just lagging. I apologize. I'm just gonna and I want you to finish your thought in a second, but just so we don't have to lag back and forth, I'm just gonna finish my sentence. So it's very interesting to me, because if you look at how people are having that attitude of, I can only take maybe less vacations or stay less nights, or do, I'm willing to be more picky because my money isn't going as far as it used to, or I have less of it. That's something we've talked about, Mark and I have talked about frequently, as well as the other guests of the show, about how people, it's not enough anymore to just set up a campground with the same patio sites and the same furniture and the same pool and the same miniature golf, and then they're just all going to fill up anymore. And I feel like that's a little bit about what you're talking about. But is that what interests me most? Is you're right. I know you're right, but I'm saying we concur on the campground side. But how do you well, actually, you know what, the question I want to ask first is that something that's impacting hotels too? Is it something where the guests are being more picky about the hotels that they stay at, because they want a hotel they stay at to offer a different or better experience than they otherwise would have been willing to settle for?
I think it's true of campgrounds, resorts, hotels, and even our restaurants. And if you think about how people live their life right now, so especially in campgrounds, what are people looking for? We can work from anywhere, right? So somebody may decide, I'm going to go spend a month in the woods. I'm going to go immerse. I'm going to go forest bathe, but I still have to go to work. So it's going to be really important to me to have Wi-Fi and I don't know, maybe a comfortable backdrop that your boss isn't going to know you're in the forest if you have to do a Zoom meeting. So
you can plop in the middle of the forest while you're forest bathing. It's so weird. That's such a weird term. I'm going to have to get used to that.
I know, it took me a minute while you were talking. I was like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. So, but yeah, I think it's true. We're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it in restaurants. We're seeing it in hotels. And I think it's, we partner with our national partners. And then our state partners through Explore Minnesota, our statewide tourism. And even I think, Mark, it was you talking about the DMOs and the CVBs. We're all seeing consistently is that the businesses we represent and serve, and in the DMO's case promote, they're having to get really creative to draw people in. To your point, you don't just put up your shingle and people fill your park and then it just cycles through. Those days I think are gone, and it's how do you get that edge? And it's from everything from how do you get that edge with your employees? How do you get that edge with your guest? And, it's making it harder. So all of our members, every hospitality owner operator in our state, and I would argue our nation, is doing more with less for less, and having to evolve every year, every quarter, every season. It's got to be different. And God help you if you don't have a pickleball court right now, right? That's everybody's go-to.
So that's interesting. If you talk about, and maybe I just want to not interrogate and investigate journalist you or anything like that, but ask you maybe a question that you have to think about for a second before answering. And that's if you look at, and I know everybody's preferences are different. Everybody wants something different. There are luxury travelers, there are budget travelers, there are mid-tier travelers, there are people who want pickleball courts. There are people like me who bought pickleball shoes and realized they can't play pickleball. There are all kinds of people, right? And so recognizing that everybody's opinion is different when you answer this question, if you were speaking to hotel owners, campground owner. I mean, you are speaking to campground owners, but those type of business owners, and they came to you and they said, Angie, I have a chance to do one thing. Like, I'm not even talking about like renovations that cost millions of dollars or adding a water park or putting in a restaurant, but I have a chance to do one thing that's different. And like not all doing the same thing, right? But like one thing that's different that could really have a chance to set me apart. What would you recommend, Angie, from your data and your experience that I should focus on in 2025?
Oh my God, Brian.
I told you it was hard.
Yeah, and I don't know that I can come up with an answer for you. There is no one magic thing. I think.
No, I know that. I'm not implying that it's a magic thing. I guess I'm just looking for your intuition of a starting point, not the only thing they need to do or the thing that will make them successful, but where do I start if I have never had to focus on experience before?
Yeah, no, that is a really great question, and it's probably one that's going to rattle around in my brain for the next 3 weeks. And I'm going to call you up and go, I think I have a better answer for you. But what I see consistently that sets my our more successful members up, regardless of what segment is, it's that intangible, it's that experience, that moment, that hospitality that occurs between the employee, the owner, and the guest. And so it's those personal touches that we're seeing. So I am thinking of a resort owner who owns several properties along our North Shore, and the training that they put their employees through, and the mindset and the expectation of interaction at all times. They base it off that book, Hospitality from the Heart, and all of their employees are trained at every guest interaction, and they're doing really well. And they don't have more amenities, better amenities than any other resort on the North Shore. I mean, they're all comparable, right? But it truly is that moment, that interaction, that emotional response that they get and give to their guests that I truly think sets them apart. And as I think how I spend my money as a consumer, if I go to 2 campgrounds and they're exactly the same, or I go to 2 restaurants and all things being equal, I'm going to go where I feel most welcome. I'm going to go where somebody remembers my name. or even takes the time to learn my name if I've never been there before. So I know that's probably not as hard of a hitting answer as you wanted, Brian. And listeners are probably rolling their eyes and almost hear it from here. But I don't think that it's any one thing tangible, any item, it's not better Wi-Fi. It's not softer, sheets on the cots. It's not that anymore. I mean, it used to be that way when you think about the hotel. I mean, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even, like, oh, come and stay on our beds. We have the fluffiest beds, or, our breakfast is the hottest and our pancakes are the best. It's not that anymore. People are being more selective, and consumers are looking for that experience that makes them feel something, I think.
I mean, I will say that I'm not rolling my eyes, and if anybody in the audience is rolling their eyes, then I think that they should probably immediately stop or get a better understanding of what you're talking about. I think it was an excellent answer, and we'll get Mark's opinion. I'm going to ask you the same question in a second, Mark, so you can prepare for that. I know there's no such thing as personal touch in Wyoming because you guys are too far apart. But for the rest of the stuff, you can weigh in. But I think you're dead on right? And this is not like Outwired will be the show where we kind of speak frankly to people. So this isn't one of those, moments where I want to do that on this show. But I think there is a lot of that necessary. And to be clear, there are a lot of people in our industry who do this right. I'm not saying this is a blanket problem or even a majority problem in our industry, but I think it is a problem, especially even if you look at some of the things that your little rant group, Mark, that I'm not even in, that people kind of complain about, right? And not saying that they aren't justified. There are certainly things that you should rant about because some people are crazy and deserve to be ranted about, right? But there's also the mindset of this is hospitality. You chose to own a campground. You chose to show up every day and be involved in an even more intimate setting as a campground than you are at a hotel, with a one-on-one, either a couple or a couple members of your staff. And so there is this need to kind of go back and say, I need to focus on hospitality. I need to make sure that no matter which side of the bed I woke up in the morning and whether my coffee was tasted good or not or whatever, there's a smile on my face when I talk to that guest, because that is what's going to, and it's hard. Like, it's hard. I wake up probably 50% of the time grumpy, and I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody for a couple hours. But like, that's why I'm not in hospitality. Like, that's why I host a show that I can turn off and then be grumpy after it, right? But I don't know. Like, I think that's a larger conversation, right? That people just need to, and especially now more than ever. We'll talk more about this on not necessarily a specific topic, but on Outwired, just generally speaking, as a theme of a show. Like, you got to understand this as a park owner. Like, this is not, I mean, and Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or just say, like, I don't know, throw me under the bus or whatever you want to do. But like, and this is probably why we aren't broadcasting the other show in your group, right? It is like, I just think there's a need for some of these owners to pay more attention to what is happening out here. It's not, since 2011, the economy has been going up. Inflation has been mostly flat until the last few years. Money has been cheap. Interest has been, basically low and free. And that coincided with, like, really 2010, 11, when social media, Facebook and all that started to really pick up steam. And so since then, it has been a Kevin Costner scenario where if you build it, they will come. And if not, you just throw a couple $1,000 at Facebook ads or post for free on social media, and they will get there anyway. But it's different now.
It's different now, and if you think about it,
Angie's gonna go. Okay, go ahead, Angie, please.
Sorry, this lag is ridiculous. I'm sorry. If you think about it, we talked earlier, they're doing more with less, and there's a labor shortage. So it's more important now than ever, and I think it's harder now than ever because they're working double shift. I know a CEO of a resort group. He goes to the resorts on the weekends and strips beds because there's just not enough people to get it all done. And that's a
right.
tough
and
gig to smile through if that's not your job, probably.
Yeah. And like, to be clear, I'm not saying this is easy on a campground owner. I'm not suggesting it's just, okay, let's go to ChatGPT and figure out a plan and then everything will be fine and I'll just put on a smile. Like, it's hard, like harder than I can possibly imagine, because I'm not brave enough to own a campground for that very reason. But I think it has to be done. Mark, to you.
Yeah, so that was it's a really good question. I'll go back to my thoughts as Angie was struggling with it, because that was a good question. I always go back to the customer. I always go back to who we're serving. And so my immediate reaction about what's that magic bullet or what's that one thing you can do, the answer is it's going to vary. It depends upon your location, your audience, who your guests are, right? So that's challenging. And so the way you do that, the way I'd recommend somebody do that, is you simply go to your Google reviews and you take an honest look at what people say about your park, what they like about it, what brings them there, and that type of stuff. And if you don't have enough Google reviews, just search your competitors in your area and read their Google reviews and do that exercise to understand why people come to your area, how long they like to stay, what they want to do around your area. And you may get glimmers of information from that exercise that kind of tells you, there's something here, right? So you mentioned I'm in Wyoming, right? So I live in Wyoming. There's 500,000 people in the entire state. Like, there is an RV park that was just built not too far off the interstate, about 30 miles from my house. And that park has remained mostly empty. And that's because they're actually marketing themselves as a destination RV resort. When I look at it, they're in the middle of nowhere. They literally should call themselves middle of nowhere RV resort. That should be their tagline. That's how they should market themselves, because it would catch their interest, number one. And they're like, heck, I want to go stay in the middle of nowhere, right? So the point being is understanding why people are going by your place, why they're coming through your area, and why they're staying there. That's really the answer to your question, Brian. And it goes back to what I kind of led with here. It's a different year because we're back to normal, with air quotes around it. And that normal means you have to market. And the only way you can market, it's the basic tenet of marketing, is you have to understand what your customer wants and provide it to them, right? So.
And this is interesting to me, right? Because this is a push and pull that we're actually dealing with right now at our agency. Like, when you see what, and we'll also I feel like everything I'm saying here is like watch Outwired later, but like it's going to be a longer show, and it's meant to gear toward frank conversations, right, of the data and things with me and Scott and Greg. But like that's part of the push and pull that we're dealing with at our agency now, is like, because I'm so good at, AI, for example, like we want to do more for our clients without charging them typically what like what you're talking about, an audience style guide or an ideal customer profile or focus group market research, which traditionally cost tens of thousands of dollars to perform for a small business. That's not something that's ever been in reach for all but the biggest huge groups who own RV resorts. But now it is, if you know how to do it correctly. And it doesn't mean it's free. It doesn't mean you can just go to ChatGPT right now, log in and produce that. But I know how to do that now. And so we have 300 and some people who are banging down my door like, I need this tomorrow. But you're right. Like, now this stuff is more within reach, though. And you've got to figure out, who is my ideal customer? Why are they coming to me? What do they want? And then not only that, once I understand that, then like in some ways, focus group market research, which you can do through AI, surprisingly, even though it's fake. Scott Bahr has said it's about 95% accurate to the data that he's pulling from cold calling, because AI knows the whole internet if you're prompting it the right way. And then taking down and creating an audience style guide to basically say, this is how I should talk to this specific type of people who are going to come to my resort. What are the words they want to hear? What are the sentences? What's the length? What's the readability? What do they want to see in my website copy and my Google ads and my Facebook and social media? There's a real science behind it. And so that's the push and pull that we're dealing with, Mark. And I think a lot of owners do too, because if you're not me, and I hope nobody is, although on the other hand, I really have been trying to clone myself for a few years. So that's another push and pull there. But so if you're not me or really obsessed with AI and know this stuff, then you still think like, there's no way I can ever get that stuff done because I don't know how to do it. And even if I try to go hire somebody, it's super expensive and I'm never going to be able to afford it. And so they don't even try.
Right. And when you look at where we're going over the next few years, I mean, you're way ahead of everybody on the AI stuff. And I like to say that I'm trying to grab your coattails and ride along. And the reality is that the transformations that are coming to the macro environment over the next year to 2 years will be fundamentally transformative to the entire experience people have, both in their regular lives and the way they travel. So this is actually a really important conversation for anybody who's paying attention to this, to understand that your current guests and their current expectations with your property are going to change drastically over the next year to 2 years, period. It doesn't matter where you're at in the United States, the way people interact with you is going to change, period. So it really behooves owners to get in touch with their customers that they currently have and start understanding how that changes and adapts, because it's here. It's not coming. It's here. In the last week, the changes in implementations within AI models and access to it is so huge. Like you can't overstate.
No, like I didn't even show you, Mark, and I don't want to interrupt you. I want to finish your thought. But like I literally last night created a $30,000 research report with a prompt and an AI that thought for 37 minutes about it.
Yeah, so using the new research tools with chat. I mean, it's unbelievable. And to that point there's bigger ramifications of that right there when you think about mid-level people that are doing legal work, CPA work, bookkeeping, research, and you talk about all those mid-level people that make good livings. All of a sudden, somebody can do a 37-minute research report off of a AI tool today, right now, today, last night, right? Brian, last night you did it. Mm-hmm. That replaces what you would have paid somebody $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 to do. That the snowball effect of that, not just on our industry, but as on the global macro environment for working it's something that there's several rabbit holes you can go down if you try to project out. So my attitude right now is I'm not going to try to project out too far. I'm rather going to come in closer to stuff that I can kind of see, understand, and touch with the idea that what I think is going to happen in a year from now is like, I don't know, like, right. I can't guess what's going to happen in a year.
No,
I can guess what's going to happen in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. And so my advice to folks that run campgrounds is do the same thing. You're getting bookings now, but one of the things that everybody, and I can say this universally across the campground RV park industry, the one thing nobody's doing right now with their bookings is asking those people why they booked. And I would encourage people to start asking that question. It should be the second email that goes out after their thank you for booking email. Hey, I got a funny question for you. Why are you coming to stay at our park? And just let them respond to you via email and tell you why they're coming to your park, and just start continuously asking that question of people as they book. The information that you're going to learn, and you're actually going to see it change over time as their responses and reasons for coming to your park change. You're going to start learning, and from that, then you can start predicting what's going to happen next week, next month, and potentially a year down the road.
Yeah, it's all data collection. And now some of us have been collecting data in like Google Analytics and Google Ads and things for years, and we haven't ever had time as a human being to look at it. But whether it's that or aggregating all the email responses to that question, now you can use AI to actually do all this stuff and have the data mean something to you. But it's interesting. It's more of that same push and pull, though, right? Because Angie was talking about there's a huge amount of labor shortage in the hospitality industry, and the CEO is going and changing the bed because he can't find any other workers. But that push and pull is going to be there to now, well, okay, now the CEO can not yet automate the making of the bed, although that's probably coming in a few years, really like 2 or 3 years, maybe less. But now he can automate a bunch of his other tasks to the point of like, he still is not going to have a smile on his face when he's changing the bed, but maybe he can shift some of his other employees around that would be doing other things so they can make the bed. So it's an interesting push and pull dynamic and it's all hitting at once, because there's going to be these owners who want to not change the bed, but there's also going to be a lot of workers who are like, this stuff is going to put us out of jobs. And I think both people are not evil, but both people are going to look at the other people like they might be.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's where you start going down the rabbit hole of what's coming. Like, Brian, you were early on this. It was, 2.5, 3 years ago, you were really the first one to start speaking about AI. And if you remember, I was like, go for it. Like, you're way ahead of it. And I love where you've gone with it. But as I've started to play catch up with this, like, again, there's two models. I was telling my wife last night, we were talking about this. So just the insight, my son is 12 years old. He's homeschooled. And 6 months ago, I completely changed his entire schooling. I basically said, AI's here. He needs to become so adept at AI right now at 12 that it's not even funny, because if we don't do that, he's screwed like people who don't know what's coming. What's coming will... Kids in school today going through a normal education are completely and totally wasting their time in class. They're
100%.
They're screwed. And so that I'll share what we had as a dinner conversation. I was looking at her and I said, honey, this isn't just internet. This isn't just email. This is the Industrial Revolution. This is the Dust Bowl, when people are going from the farms to the factories. And that this is a moment, inflection point in history and time where everything we know changes. And the reality is I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know how this thing plays out. But I kind of, to put it in an analogy, I simply said, we either have Star Wars or we have Star Trek. And, Star Trek, everybody's friendly in the research. And Star Wars, you got the good guys and the bad guys, and they're fighting it out.
But you have Wookiees. What about the Wookiees?
Yeah, the Wookiees are cool, right? I like the Ewoks, though. We actually just watched it over the weekend. But the point being is that when you back it down to the hospitality business in our industry, the way things are going to change over the next year to 2 years, I'm advising my park owners to do this, you need to be very adaptable. You need to be very transparent and communicative with your guests, because that, to Angie's point about engaging with your guests and understanding and giving them a personal, that's what carries you through this. If they don't know you, if you're just a faceless, nameless provider, you're gone. If they know you and trust you, that's when they're going to come back to you. So I guess in that whole conversation, we went AI, technocracy, going into a dark place or a good place, but in the end, it comes back to the personal interaction.
Yeah, that's what it's always going to be like. And to be clear, this is part of what there are going to be people who don't like me and Scott and Greg for what we're going to talk about on Outwired. But you have to keep it in context and understand that what we're saying and what comes out of our mouth, like just now, where I said, where we both said that education and what you're going through in school doesn't matter, there's a deeper explanation behind that. Of course, you still need to know how to add and write, and you need to know how to write. And so school is still important. But when you get past the basics and fundamentals of those things, what are you still memorizing stuff for? Why? It doesn't even make any sense. Why are you still learning how to So, for example, unless it's your hobby and you love doing it, I'm just making something up, right? Obviously, there's still a need to sew, but so those things, like they're big and they're impactful, and like a lot of people are asleep, and I think that I don't know how to get them to wake up.
You can't.
I just had this.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Angie.
No, I was just going to say, I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday about the way we teach, the way kids learn. We're teaching them to learn in an antiquated way. They need to learn, to your point, science and math and all of that, but it needs to be framed in the context of something that's really relevant to how the world operates today. And so it's taking that experiential learning to a whole new level. And whether that's a career in hospitality or, some historical lesson, we just need to let them learn it in a way that's applicable in the real world.
Right. And this is what, we've been talking about this, like at our company, like how do we adapt this, right? And then you also hear the people on YouTube, mostly in my space, in the AI tech space, who are paying attention to this stuff, but you'll hear them say, like, I don't know what are these kids supposed to learn? What are they supposed to educate themselves for? What are they going to college for? Nobody knows. Yes, you do know. The problem is that you yourself, including me, when I went to school, were never taught how to figure it out. And the answer is if you go back to, and we had this discussion at our company, we're going to retrain everybody who works at our company and every new hire, and we're going to teach them like the ancient Romans did. And if you look back at how the ancient Romans did, there was two types of methodologies to teach people there. The slave in ancient Rome would learn a skill. And that's how Western education was formed, not just in the United States, how Western education was formed, generally speaking, because you needed to get people off the farm and into the factory and into the assembly line. And nobody sane wanted to leave their nice little happy farm with all their cows and green space to go into a factory floor and breathe in all the dust and stuff and work on an assembly line. And so we created school to sit in neat little rows and to raise your hand and say, yes, I am, and do things exactly the way you were told, because when you got out of school, you had to go to the factory and there was no room for error back in 1910 to do it the way you thought it should be done. And that has never changed in the last 100+ years. Whereas if you were a free person in Rome, you were taught how to teach yourself. You were taught critical thinking, because the government of Rome and you had no clue what you were going to do in your life. So the hope is to teach you how to teach yourself, to teach you how to learn, so that when you got out of school, you would figure it out. And if you decided to be a blacksmith, the hope was you would decide to be something that would benefit all of Roman society. But when you figured out what you wanted to do, you had the skills to teach yourself to become a blacksmith. But we don't have that now. And that's the two most important things to teach your kids right now. Critical thinking, so that you understand how to learn the new things, ask the right questions, figure it out, and communication. If you have those two things, you can do anything you want.
Agreed. Yeah, that's really well put, Brian, and I completely agree with you on that. And I would argue a little bit that we actually do have that tool a little bit. If you're a free thinker enough, it's like when I mentioned that we changed my son's education. We're leaning upon videos on YouTube. So we're getting him to people who are discussing stuff like this at that level, and then also doing tutorials and everything else. So we're kind of going to that route where, I'll give you for example, last week I sent him a video and it was an interview. It was an hour and 20-minute interview of a 17-year-old kid who built an app and he's making $1 million a month. And the reason I shared it wasn't so much that he built an app or he made $1 million a month, but he was sharing his thought processes, his procedures, the way he looked at the world. And so, the hope is that teaching my son the way this person who's at a young age succeeded thinks about the world, that he would glean that, wait a second, what I'm learning in school doesn't fit. I actually need to think a little bit outside the box.
Yeah. And it's not that people are incapable of this. Like, I'm not suggesting some people are worse than others. It's just that you were never taught this in school. So how are you supposed to teach it to your kids? How are you supposed to learn how to teach it to your kids? Right? Like, I think there are some people, maybe like 5% in the whole world, who are incapable of thinking this way. But I think 95% of people are. They just have no idea where to start or how to do it. And that's why you see so many people come out of college who learn one thing in college and train themselves on new computer programs and things, but aren't really learning, if that makes sense. And it's not by their own fault. Sometimes it is. but like there's things I don't want to learn how to do, right? I don't want to clean my house. But just as an example, right? I just don't think they know how.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to solve that problem.
I think time and outcome. The way the conversation ended last night with my wife that I shared with y'all is, we can't answer it on our own. All we can do is control ourselves and our own actions, right? That's all we have control over. And in the end, this is going to go wherever it goes and how fast it goes. But, I mentioned to her, I said, this is actually a moment in time here where there's real opportunity for somebody people, like there's real opportunity here because there's a giant gap right now between those who know and those who don't. And the amount of people who know is very, very small. And the people that don't are down here. But the people and when I say down here, I'm not saying better or worse. I'm just saying different scales.
How dare you, Mark?
Yeah. But the people that don't know have the capital and the willingness to pay somebody who does to help them out. So there's a real arbitrage there. And I would just encourage people to really dive deep on this content because it's going to change the world and it's actively doing it right now.
And that's the thing is that then it goes back to this full circle problem that we're in. And I know we need to wrap up in a second, especially because I have another show in 58 minutes now. But like it goes back to this whole existential problem of like, I'm changing the sheets in the hotel as the CEO. How do you expect me to have time to keep up with this stuff and learn it? And I don't have an answer for that. I really, truly don't. And I have empathy for it. And I'm not suggesting like it's just as easy as it just came out of my mouth to go do. But like go to ChatGPT. I mean, if you like, for one, go to ChatGPT. If you haven't been on ChatGPT, I'll get down on my knees and beg you, go to ChatGPT. But go to ChatGPT, figure out what it is, and say, hey, I'm a busy CEO of a hospitality company, and I can't find enough workers to change my sheets. One, how do I solve that problem? And I'm not suggesting there's an easy answer there, but at least there's a starting process. And he probably already knows, right? As the CEO. But then two is like, I want to learn how to prepare my business for the future. And to do that, I know I need to learn how to critical think and teach myself new skills. But like, I have no time. It's like, it's a struggle. I'm working 2 jobs, or I'm coming home and taking care of my kids, or cooking dinner for my spouse, or running the kids to hockey practice, or dealing with the guest that's complaining of the Wi-Fi doesn't work or whatever, right? How do I do it? And see what it says. It's not going to be a magic bullet, but it's going to have a pretty good answer for you if you ask it the right question. And that's the best I think we can do for now, right?
Agreed.
Sound advice.
It's been a good show, Brian.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, apparently, there's a number in my top of my screen that like nobody really left off when we started talking about controversial things. But if you're interested in those controversial topics, Outwired, our new podcast with myself, Scott Bahr, and Greg Emmert, starts in 46 minutes and 45 seconds. Wow, my math was so good at the counter there. And we're going to be talking about things like we're going to dive deep into AI, into operator, into all the techie, geeky things. But we're also going to talk about data and all kinds of things. We might have a little bit of whiskey just to dull the pain for everybody involved in it. But it's going to be an interesting show. I'm interested in it. And we'll see how many people hate me after week 1 and if I get canceled or not. So, but thank you guys for joining us. I appreciate it as always, Mark. Where can they find out more about Campground Views?
Right now?
Well, yeah, your virtual tours. Like, where can they find out more about your virtual
where
tours?
can they find out? They can find it at campgroundviews.com. In fact, if you own a campground or RV park, make sure you've claimed your listing over there. We're getting a lot of traffic now. You really want to make sure that you're properly listed over there. It's free to update that information. So go over there, post pictures, claim your listing, make sure you're good.
Awesome. Thanks for being here as always, Mark. And Angie, where can they find out about if they're in Minnesota, or generally speaking, if they just want to follow the trends? How do they find out more about Hospitality Minnesota, joining, becoming a member, that kind of stuff?
You can find us at hospitalitymn.com, and you'll find all of our advocacy issues, all of our map of all of our properties across the state, and we'd love to answer and take calls from anyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Angie. I really appreciate your time and the few minutes that you went over with us, and for tolerating our weird discussion at the end there. But we'll see you next week on another episode, and then don't forget to tune in for Outwired tonight. But next week, another episode of MC Fireside Chats. Really appreciate you guys all being here, and we'll see you next week.